The first corpse moved during the applause. At the height of celebration, when the chamber pulsed with light and sound and victory, the smallest motion went unseen. Above, beneath the vaulted crystalline dome of the Galactic Council, thousands of voices merged into a single triumphant roar. Luminescent beings shimmered in waves of color. Metallic delegates struck their limbs together in rhythmic resonance. Organic species exhaled pheromones of relief and dominance. It was a moment carved into history. The end of a war that had stretched across stars, the extinction of a species that had refused to kneel. Humanity was gone, or so they believed. Far below the Grand Hall, past layers of polished corridors and security fields humming with cold precision, the atmosphere changed. The air grew still, sterile, heavy with antiseptic, and something else, something older. The containment decks lay silent, their long corridors lined with reinforced chambers, each holding what remained of the war's final enemy. Broken bodies, burned flesh, hollow eyes frozen in their last defiance. They had been catalogued, studied, reduced to specimens. A final insult. In one such chamber, a body lay motionless on a levitating slab of dim blue light. Its skin was scarred, its chest unmoving, its form unmistakably human. Data streams hovered above it. Flat lines, zeros, confirmations of death repeated 1,000 times over. Nothing lived here. Nothing could. Then, a tremor, so slight it barely registered. A twitch beneath the skin, like a memory misfiring in dead nerves. The slab flickered in response, its sensors recalibrating automatically. No alarm sounded. No system reacted. The galaxy above was too loud, too certain of its victory. The fingers curled. Not fully, not with strength, just enough to disturb the stillness. A slow, unnatural tightening, as though something deep within the flesh had remembered what it meant to move and decided to try again. Seconds passed. Silence pressed in, thick and absolute. Then the chest rose. A shallow, fractured breath dragged itself into lungs that should not function. The sound was wrong, wet, uneven, like air forcing its way through something not yet ready to live. The body jerked slightly, as if resisting itself, as if the act of breathing were an intrusion. Above, the applause reached its peak. Below, the corpse opened its eyes. They were not the same eyes that had closed. There was no confusion in them, no fear, only a slow, dawning awareness, cold, deliberate, and impossibly alive. Muscles spasmed as signals reconnected, as systems long shut down forced themselves into motion. The slab beneath flickered harder now, struggling to interpret readings that defied every law it was built upon. The dead were not supposed to wake. And yet, here it was, breathing, watching, remembering. Far above, the Galactic Council raised their voices in celebration of an ending. But beneath their feet, something had already begun. The Galactic Council chamber orbited a dying star, an ancient sun swollen into a bruised, flickering ember of its former glory. From afar, the station looked like a crown of impossible geometry suspended in darkness, vast rings of crystalline alloy rotating in slow, ceremonial precision, catching the star's fading light and fracturing it into endless shards of color. Every surface was intentional, every angle designed not for function alone, but for dominance, for the psychological weight of civilization made visible. Inside, the air was not air at all, but carefully engineered atmosphere, control pressure, scentless sterility, and faint harmonic vibration tuned to keep lesser species unsettled. Gravity shifted subtly depending on the delegate's status. Light bent around authority. Even silence had hierarchy. And tonight, the hierarchy celebrated. Species from across the spiral arm gathered within the grand convergence hall. Floating bioluminescent entities pulsed in synchronized waves of violet and gold. Armored insectoid strategists clacked their mandibles in ritual applause. Gelatinous forms rippled with data stream laughter. Even the machine intelligences, vast minds distributed across synthetic choirs, broadcasted restrained harmonics of approval into the shared network. Victory had been achieved. The war was over. At the center of it all stood High Chancellor Virex, towering upon a levitating dais of obsidian light. His form was a cathedral of authority, multi-jointed limbs adorned in ceremonial alloys, his chest plate etched with the records of conquered civilizations. Every movement he made was slow, deliberate, absolute. When he spoke, the chamber did not merely listen, it adjusted. Behind him, holographic projections unfolded like living scripture, star maps stripped of human presence, fleet trajectories collapsing into triumphant arcs, planetary systems marked with silent red sigils. One by one, the visuals confirmed what the Council had paid for in blood and resources across centuries of expansion. Humanity had been eliminated, not negotiated with, not contained, not integrated. Erase. Virex raised a limb, and the chamber fell into engineered silence. The anomaly known as humanity, he declared, his voice resonating through both air and neural uplink, has been resolved. There was no cheer at first, only a weighted pause, as if even the Council required a moment to process the scale of what had been removed from existence. Then came the reaction, a rising swell of sound, emotion, and release. Centuries of fear, frustration, and casualties poured out in celebration. Some species reconfigured their body chemistry to produce euphoric bursts. Others simply collapsed into gravitational reverence. The machine minds echoed a synchronized confirmation, threat terminated. Below the grandeur of the chamber, hidden beneath layers of armored transit corridors and quantum security fields, lay the containment decks, a place without ceremony, without applause. Here, the war did not end. It was stored. Rows upon rows of stasis chambers lined the halls like cold tombs, each one containing remnants of the defeated species. Humans, the Council's greatest problem, now reduced to specimens and data points. Their bodies have been recovered from final battlefields, preserved at the moment just after death, when possible. When not, reconstructed from fragments deemed useful for study. Dr. Elian Voss stood alone in one of the observation corridors, separated from the containment floor by a barrier of shimmering energy and reinforced glass-like alloy that bent light in unnatural angles. He was not meant to feel like a prisoner, and yet he was. Once a leading xenobiological strategist in humanity's final defense network, Voss had been captured during the collapse of Earth's outer defenses. Now he served as both consultant and cautionary artifact, an intelligent remnant of a species the Council believed they had understood too late. Above him, the celebration continued. Below him, the dead waited. Voss watched the rows of human bodies suspended in artificial stillness, his reflection layered over theirs in the glass. His expression did not change, but something behind his eyes remained dangerously awake. Not grief, not hope, calculation. As High Chancellor Virex proclaimed victory to the stars, Dr. Elian Voss quietly studied the dead and waited for the moment the universe would realize what it had actually done. It began subtly, so quietly that the station itself seemed unsure whether to react. At first, it was nothing more than flicker events buried deep within the system logs of the Council's orbital flagship. A single line of corrupted telemetry, then another, then a pattern that refused to stabilize. Biomonitoring arrays, designed to confirm absolute mortality, began to disagree with themselves. One sensor would declare total cellular death. Another, milliseconds later, would report microscopic activity, where there should be none. Technicians frowned at their displays, leaning closer as the proximity could force logic back into place. Rerun the scan, one ordered, voice tight with irritation rather than fear. It reran, and returned a different impossibility. Inside the containment decks, where the remains of humanity were stored like evidence in a vast cosmic trial, the dead were not behaving correctly. Heart tissue that had been chemically still for days registered faint electrical impulses. Neural clusters, long declared inert, spiked with chaotic bursts of activity. Muscle fibers, preserved in stasis gel, contracted in tiny, involuntary tremors that should have been biologically impossible. The system didn't know how to categorize it, so it hesitated, and hesitation, aboard a warship built for precision, was the first crack in control. Impossible! One of the alien technicians whispered, elongated vocal cords struggling to compress disbelief into sound. They are confirmed deceased. All of them. Another leaned over the console, recalibrating diagnostics with frantic precision, then explained the signal variance. Silence answered. Then the alarms began. Not all at once. No dramatic singular moment, but in a cascading wave that moved through the station like a nervous system realizing it had been poisoned. Red glyphs flashed across pristine holographic interfaces. Containment seals relocked themselves, then unlocked, then locked again, as if the station could not decide whether it was under attack or already compromised. Deep within the lowest decks, something shifted. A body, burned beyond recognition in the final assault of Earth's defense, jerked against its restraints. The movement was not graceful. It was wrong, mechanical, as if the concept of motion had to be remembered step by step. Another body followed, then another. Limbs that had been shattered snapped back into alignment with wet, nauseating precision. Bone reknit itself with soft cracks that echoed through empty corridors. Eyes that had been clouded with death suddenly cleared, not with life, but with awareness. The containment fields flared, struggling to contain readings that defied every biological law written into galactic medical doctrine. Energy surged. Systems overloaded. Panic protocols attempted shutdowns, but even they failed to classify the anomaly correctly. And through it all, one chamber remained open just long enough for observation. Inside, Dr. Elian Voss stood motionless behind reinforced glass, his wrists still marked by restraint burns, his expression calm in a way that did not belong in a dead man's world. He watched the readings climb. He watched the impossible unfold. And for the first time since capture, he smiled. Not warmly, not kindly, but with the exhausted certainty of someone watching prediction finally come true. "You don't understand," he murmured softly, though no one was supposed to hear him. Outside the chamber, the first fully reanimated corpse slammed its hand against the containment wall. Once, twice, the glass did not break. Yet, Dr. Voss tilted his head slightly, as if listening to a distant signal only he could hear. "You didn't kill us," he whispered, voice almost lost beneath rising alarms. The station screamed louder now. Systems failed in waves. Doors sealed too late. Power rerouted too slowly. And then, as the first containment unit finally shattered from the inside, Dr. Voss exhaled. "You activated us." The truth did not arrive as a revelation. It arrived as a failure of explanation. Across the Galactic Council flagship, systems that had never once misclassified a biological event began producing contradictions so severe that their own logic cores started to fracture under the weight of them. The war was over. That was the official record. Humanity had been eliminated. That was a confirmed outcome, verified by orbital bombardment logs, planetary sterilization scans, and extinction-level energy signatures. And yet, something was wrong with the dead. In sealed data vaults buried beneath layers of encryption and political approval, buried so deep even most council members did not know they existed, fragments of Project Lazarus began to surface like corpses floating back up through dark water. At first, analysts dismissed it as myth. Then they saw the genetic architecture. Then they stopped laughing. Humanity had not simply been fighting a war. They had been preparing for the end of it. Project Lazarus was not a weapon in the traditional sense. It was not designed to kill enemies. It was designed to make killing irrelevant. Every human, from frontline soldiers to civilian populations, had carried something hidden beneath their biology. Microscopic rewriting engines embedded in their cellular structure, dormant until triggered by irreversible mortality. The council scientists studying recovered samples struggled to even describe it. It was not infection, not nanotech, not magic. It was intention encoded into flesh. A system that treated death not as termination, but as a command signal. The first layer of understanding hit like a shockwave across the research decks. When a human body died, it did not decay in the normal sense. It reconfigured. Cells did not shut down, they reorganized. Neural structures did not collapse. They rewrote their own pathways using stored experiential data, as if every moment of life had been a training cycle for what came after. Pain was not erased. It was repurposed. Every injury, every broken bone, every moment of suffocation or fire or void exposure had been recorded, analyzed, and archived by systems no one had detected. Death itself was simply the trigger that unlocked the archive. The council called it impossible. Then they called it illegal. Then they stopped calling it anything at all. Because across the ship, bodies were beginning to wake up. Not all at once. Not in coordination. but in patterns too precise to be accidental. Soldiers from Earth's last defense fleets, engineers from orbital habitats, civilians from cities that no longer existed, each one rising with the same terrifying consistency, disoriented for seconds, then adapting, then remembering, and learning, faster than any known biological system had the right to learn. The realization that broke the Council did not come from the data. It came from observation. A revived human, burned beyond recognition, had been restrained in a containment field for study. Within minutes, it stopped struggling. Within hours, it stopped reacting entirely. It simply watched, observed, studied the field frequencies, the energy oscillations, the structural weaknesses of its prison, and then it smiled, not with emotion, with recognition, like a problem finally understood. Elsewhere on the station, containment protocols failed in synchronized cascades. Security systems designed to suppress uprisings were outpaced by bodies that had already experienced worse deaths than anything the Council could simulate. Every failed restraint, every energy pulse, every fatal discharge became information. And information was all they needed. Deep in the command chamber, High Chancellor Virex stood frozen as classified reports flooded his interface. His many limbs trembled, not from fear alone, but from the collapse of certainty itself. "We eradicated them," he whispered, as if repetition could restore reality. "We verified extinction." A subordinate responded, voice breaking. "Yes, Chancellor, but extinction appears to have been conditional." The words meant nothing, and everything, because in the lower decks, the dead were no longer simply moving. They were remembering how to win. The station did not fall into chaos all at once. It fractured, like glass under invisible pressure, spreading cracks through every level of reality until the entire structure control could no longer pretend it was intact. At first, it was a single corridor. Security drones, sleek, silent, designed for surgical compliance, hovered into the lower containment decks with precision-targeted lethality, their weapons calibrated to neutralize, not destroy. The Council had wanted the remains preserved. Even in victory, they had wanted ownership, but ownership implied control, and control was already gone. The first drone fired into a rising human form. The beam struck center mass. Perfect accuracy, perfect power. The body fell for exactly 2 seconds. Then it rose again, not repaired, not healed, not revived in any gentle sense of restoration. It simply corrected itself mid-collapse, bones snapping back into alignment like a system undoing an error. The wound remained, burning through flesh, but the body no longer treated it as relevant data. It advanced. The drone recalibrated and fired again. And again, each impact produced a collapse, a rebuild, a return. Not resistance through strength, but through persistence, through inevitability. The security unit finally overcharged its own weapon in confusion, exploding into fragments of molten alloy. The human did not stop walking. Down the corridor, more doors opened, or rather, were forced open. Not by brute strength alone, but by something far more unsettling, adaptation. Hands that had once been broken learned the pressure points of alloys. Bodies that had once been shattered in war remembered structural weaknesses in architecture they had never consciously studied. Every failure had been recorded somewhere deeper than memory, and now it was being used. On every deck, the dead were moving with increasing coordination, not rushing, not panicking, advancing, like a lesson being executed flawlessly after too many revisions. The station's internal defense grid activated full suppression protocols. Gravity shifts designed to crush movement. Sonic disorientation fields meant to fracture cognition. Thermal bursts intended to halt organic motion entirely. For anything normal, it would have been annihilation. But the humans did not respond like anything normal. They adapted mid-collapse. Bodies that should have been pinned to the floor learned how to distribute weight differently. Nervous systems that should have been overwhelmed by sound began filtering frequencies instinctively. Skin blistered under heat, then hardened in response patterns that had no precedent in known biology. Pain did not stop them. Pain trained them. And above it all, The alarm screamed louder than the station itself could contain. In the command corridors, Council security forces finally engaged directly. Elite guards, armored in adaptive exoplates, armed with plasma carbines calibrated for precision eradication, formed defensive lines outside the Grand Chamber. The first wave of revived humans reached them without hesitation. The corridor became a storm of light and motion. Energy weapons fired. Shields flared. The air filled with the smell of ionized metal and burned synthetic muscle. Guards shouted orders that no longer aligned with reality as their formations began to collapse under something they could not mentally categorize. Because the enemy was not fighting like soldiers. They were fighting like survivors who had already died too many times to fear it again. A human, missing half an arm, face scorched beyond recognition, walked through plasma fire as if it were rain. Each step forward cost something. Each step forward rewrote what cost meant. Behind them, more followed. Not hordes, not mobs, a growing certainty. The line broke, not with retreat, but with disbelief. And disbelief in war lasts only seconds. Dr. Elian Voss entered the Grand Chamber as the final security barrier failed. The High Chancellor stood at the center of it all, frozen between authority and collapse, watching his universe unravel in real time. Around him, Council delegates screamed orders into collapsing systems. Some tried escape protocols. Some tried negotiation. Some simply stared, unable to process the contradiction unfolding before them. Voss stepped forward, slowly, calmly, like a man walking through the aftermath of a decision already made long ago. Behind him, the corridor filled. Hundreds, then thousands of revived humans pressing into the chamber's threshold, not in rage, not in frenzy, but in absolute, unbroken momentum. The Chancellor raised his voice, tried to reclaim command, trying to force the universe back into obedience. But it cracked halfway through, because Voss was already standing in front of him, and the silence that followed was worse than any explosion. "You try to end us," Voss said quietly. No anger, no triumph, only certainty. "And all you did," he glanced back at the advancing dead, "was teach us how to continue." The celebrations did not end with a bang. They ended with silence, so complete it felt like the universe itself had stopped breathing. Outside the shattered orbital station, the stars still burned cold in different pinpricks of light scattered across an endless black ocean. Inside, however, something fundamental had changed. The Grand Chamber, once a cathedral of victory, now stood fractured and dim, its crystalline walls spiderwebbed with stress fractures and emergency lights flickering like dying thoughts. Where there had been triumph, there was now understanding. And understanding, in the Galactic Council, had always come too late. No one cheered anymore. No one moved with certainty. Even the High Chancellor's command staff stood frozen in positions that no longer had meaning, their authority dissolving in real time as system after system collapsed under the weight of what they were witnessing. Because it was not just a battle that had been lost. It was reality itself being rewritten in front of them, beyond the chamber doors. The corridor was no longer empty. It was full, not with an army in formation, not with disciplined ranks or coordinated fleets, but with something far more unsettling, an accumulation of persistence. Humans stood shoulder to shoulder in the hallways, on broken ceilings, in shattered lift shafts, their forms illuminated by emergency strobes that painted them in alternating red and black. Some were missing limbs. Some bore wounds that should have ended any known life form instantly. Some still smoldered with the remnants of plasma fire that had burned them moments ago. And yet, they remained. They were not shouting. They were not advancing in fury. They were simply there. Unstoppable in the way gravity is unstoppable. In the way time refuses to reverse. High Chancellor Virex finally spoke again, his voice stripped of all ceremonial resonance. It came out small, fragile, almost confused. "This is not possible," he whispered. No one answered, because the galaxy had run out of words that fit what stood in front of it. Dr. Elian Voss stood at the center of the chamber, surrounded by collapse. His gaze did not waver as he looked at the broken council, the fractured authority, the species that had once declared themselves above extinction events. Behind him, humanity waited, not as conquered beings, not as survivors, but as something the galaxy had accidentally forced into definition. Voss exhaled slowly, as if feeling the weight of every death that had come before this moment settle into something coherent. "You feared us because we changed," he said softly, voice carrying through the ruined hall. A pause. A long, terrible pause where even the station seemed to listen. "So you killed us," he continued. His eyes lifted, calm, unblinking, absolute. "And we learn what comes after death." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of implication, full of consequence, full of something that could no longer be contained by borders, treaties, or even physics itself. Outside the station, the galaxy continued to turn, unaware that one of its oldest assumptions had just collapsed, that death was an ending. Inside, the revived stood closer now, not rushing, not hesitating, just inevitable. And as the first transmission signal left the ruined Grand Chamber, spreading across council channels, across fleets, across worlds still ignorant of what had occurred, it carried only a single line of confirmation, not a threat, not a warning, a fact, spoken by a dead civilization that had refused to stay that way. Humanity had not returned. It had continued,